Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from Antiwar.com. This is Anti-War News for Tuesday, March 12th, 2024. All right, so I hope everybody had a good weekend. I had a nice long one. So Sunday night, I was in Washington, D.C. for the Pierre Sprey Award event, and it was very cool. I got to meet Max Blumenthal, who won the top prize, and then me and Gareth Porter were the runners-up for the award, and it was really cool meeting Gareth. And last year's winner, Aaron Mate, was also there, as well as Sam Husseini. He also won an award last year. So it was really cool to meet all of them. I met Ben Cohen of Ben & Jerry's, who put it all together. And all of the people on the board for the award, basically the judging panel, Andrew Coburn, Winslow Wheeler, Franklin Spinney. These are serious people, and it's really cool that they considered me for this award. So it was a cool event. I'll talk more about it a bit at the end here, but I want to get into the news here because there is a lot of stuff. Kyle Anzalone and a few other guys did some writing over the weekend for me while I was off on Sunday, and they covered a lot of stuff. So just a few of the things that were on the page for Monday. The top story was that Netanyahu ignores Biden and says that he will attack Rafah. And so what happened in this interview that Biden did over the weekend, he was asked if Israel attacking Rafah was a red line or something, and Biden said, yeah, it's a red line, but I'm not going to set any red lines, and I'm going to keep giving weapons to Israel for what he called self-defense. But he essentially said there was a red line and then immediately walked it back in the same interview. And regardless of him walking it back, Netanyahu responded, and he said, my red line is that Hamas stays in Rafah. So he's saying he's going to invade Rafah anyway, and publicly rebuked Biden again. So really, it just goes to show how it just makes Biden look very weak. But still, it's just really something to see Biden say that, yeah, there's a red line. No, actually, there's not. And then a few other things that we have here. A big story on Friday. One of these aid airdrops happened again, and apparently one of the pallets or whatever they drop exactly that has the aid, the parachute didn't open, and it crushed 5 Palestinians to death. So the aid that they're dropping on Gaza killed 5 Palestinians. And the U.S. claimed that it wasn't their aid that killed them, but who knows what the story is. The U.S. did do an aid drop that day, but other countries are doing them as well, including Egypt, Jordan, and I think France. And then Israel, the other stories here, Jason Ditz covered some more Lebanon stuff. Israel did some drills, basically preparing for if they were to invade Lebanon. And then there's also there was an Israeli airstrike that killed a family of 5. The Pope has come under criticism for saying that Ukraine should negotiate, should not be afraid of the white flag, was kind of the way he put it. Connor Freeman covered that article. And of course, he's being accused of being, a Russian puppet or whatever. That's the usual smear for people who are calling for negotiations. That's really kind of the big stuff. Some of this stuff I left up for today's page so we can go over it. It was a big weekend. Just a lot of horrific stuff continues in Gaza. And so one thing, so Sunday was March 10th, and that was the start of Ramadan. And if you remember, Benny Gantz, who's a minister in the Israeli War Cabinet, threatened that they would invade Rafah by Ramadan if there was no hostages released, and there has been no hostage deal. But so far, we haven't seen Israel move in on the full-scale invasion. The airstrikes and everything continue, but we haven't seen a full-scale assault on the city of Rafah. All right, so excuse me. To get into today's stories, the top story at antiwar.com, U.S. intelligence says that Hamas is not going away. So an annual threat assessment compiled by U.S. intelligence agencies was released on Monday and said that Israel will likely face resistance from Hamas for years to come. And this is just more evidence that Netanyahu's stated goal of eradicating Hamas is not realistic. So this threat assessment, again, this is compiled by all the U.S. intel agencies. It says, quote, Israel probably will face lingering armed resistance from Hamas for years to come, and the military will struggle to neutralize Hamas's underground infrastructure, which allows insurgents to hide, regain strength, and surprise Israeli forces, end quote. So this assessment actually aligns with an Israeli military document that was circulated last month and said even if Israel succeeded in dismantling Hamas as an organized military force, the group would still exist as a terror group and a guerrilla group. Other reports have said Israel is struggling to destroy the vast tunnel network underneath Gaza that is key to Hamas's survival and is far more expansive than Israel initially thought. So the threat assessment did say that as well, that dismantling their underground infrastructure will be a challenge. And so I mentioned, I mentioned again something I covered a few months ago, that General Charles Q. Brown, who is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest ranking U.S. military officer, he said back in November that the Israel's mass killing of civilians in Gaza will be a recruiting tool for Hamas. And he was saying that, you got to end hostilities. He said, quote, the faster you can get to a point where you stop the hostilities, you have less strife for the civilian population that turns into someone who now wants to be the next member of Hamas, end quote. So look at all this evidence, U.S. intelligence basically saying Hamas can't be defeated. You have Israeli military intelligence saying the same thing. The highest ranking U.S. military officer warning that Israel's tactics are just going to, create more Hamas fighters, but it doesn't matter. The U.S. still continues to provide unconditional aid for the slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza. The death toll, according to Gaza's health ministry, is now over 31,000. That's considered to be an undercount. I mean, it must be an undercount because they're not taking into counting the thousands of people who are under the rubble. And the Biden administration has been trying to distance itself from Netanyahu by criticizing his government, but the rhetoric has not amounted to a policy change. The U.S. threat assessment actually mentioned the Netanyahu government and said that, they're saying Hamas isn't going anywhere, but they said that Netanyahu could lose his hold on power, which was interesting. So this report said, quote, Netanyahu's viability as leader as well as his governing coalition of far-right and ultra-Orthodox parties that pursued hardline policies on Palestinian and security issues may be in jeopardy. Distrust of Netanyahu's ability to rule has deepened and broadened access across the public from its already high levels before the war, and we expect large protests demanding his resignation and new elections. A different, more moderate government is a possibility, end quote. And of course, we know that it's in Netanyahu's interest to keep this thing going. While there's all these polls saying that after the war, he should resign, the polls also show that they support this war, this genocidal war that Netanyahu is waging against the Palestinians in Gaza. So another interesting nugget in this intelligence assessment, and I might write some more stories based on it. There's a lot of nonsense in there. Again, this is U.S. intelligence, but it's definitely very interesting that you have them saying this goal that Netanyahu is setting is not realistic, because this is a government, this is a military that the U.S. is supporting unconditionally, and they're saying that their goal is unrealistic. So it's definitely significant. But there's a lot of stuff about China and Russia, but there's some interesting stuff about Iran. It said that Iran had no role in Hamas's October 7th attack, and it also acknowledged that Tehran is not seeking a nuclear weapon. And it also said that Iran's increase in uranium enrichment since 2018 really started in 2019. They waited a year before they started increasing things. But since 2018, when the U.S. pulled out of the nuclear deal, it acknowledges that is all to build negotiating leverage, which is very obvious to anyone who understands what's going on with Iran. But those increases in enrichment are always used for this scaremongering that Iran's trying to build a nuclear weapon. So it's interesting to see U.S. intelligence say. It's just for leverage for negotiations. All right, so the next one here, South Dakota law conflates criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. So South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem signed a bill into law last week that conflates some criticisms of the modern state of Israel with anti-Semitism. So by signing this bill into law, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism must be taken into consideration in investigations of unfair or discriminatory practices within the state of South Dakota. So the IHRA's definition, that's the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, their definition was first adopted in 2016, and it lists as an example of anti-Semitism, drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis. And now this bill was just signed into law as Israel is waging this brutal campaign in Gaza, using starvation as a weapon of war, killing so many women and children. You have the ICJ ruling that it's plausible Israel is committing genocide. So is that a comparison to the Nazis? I mean, the way that this can be interpreted, it's just wide open for interpretation. And this definition also defines anti-Semitism as applying double standards to Israel by requiring of it a behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation. Now, again, that's so open for interpretation. One thing people criticize me for is focusing so much on criticizing Israel. And, the reason why I do that is because they get so much military aid from my government, from my taxes. So even before this October 7th attack, and then the, Israel unleashing this campaign in Gaza, Israel was something we always really focused on at antiwar.com because of it's a unique relationship. All this military aid, $3.8 billion that they get each year, the highest military aid recipient. If you take Ukraine out of the picture for the last few years, Israel's the biggest recipient. So some people accuse me of being anti-Semitic because I focus on Israel, which is completely ridiculous. And it also, as another definition, it lists denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination. And an example of that they use is saying that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor. So again, very open to interpretation. And these are laws that I've been wanting to cover for a while, but I just never really got around to it. I thought now that would be a good time with everything that's happening in Gaza, because more and more people are being critical of Israel for what they're doing. And so, according to the Jerusalem Post, by signing this bill into law, South Dakota is now the 12th U.S. state to codify this definition of anti-Semitism into law. So that means there's potential if there's someone's accused of being a discriminatory thing, like say you fire somebody and they accuse you of being anti-Semitic, can they use your criticism of Israel to prove that? That's what it seems like. And there's at least 23 other U.S. states have supported this definition through legislative action, but have not officially made it into law. The U.S. State Department has also adopted this definition. So many U.S. states have also passed laws to punish individuals or companies who boycott Israel. And these are laws designed to fight against boycott, divestment, and sanctions, the BDS movement that advocates for global boycotts to pressure Israel. Over 30 states have adopted these anti-BDS laws. And this is something that I covered a lot. I think it was before I actually did this podcast when Ben & Jerry's, speaking of Ben & Jerry's, the ice cream company, they announced in 2021 that they were going to stop selling ice cream only in illegal Israeli settlements in the West Bank and I think East Jerusalem as well. They said they would stop selling in the settlements. They didn't say that they would stop selling ice cream in Israel, but after they did that, several U.S. states, including Colorado, New York, New Jersey, Illinois, Arizona, Florida, and Texas, they all took action against Unilever, which is the parent company of Ben & Jerry's. They're a British conglomerate that bought Ben & Jerry's many years ago. And what these anti-BDS laws allow is for these states to divest pension funds from companies that boycott Israel, and they did that. And eventually, the British company sold off Ben & Jerry's to a local company in Israel that basically just is changing the label and is going to keep selling it in the settlements. But this just goes to show, Ben & Jerry's, now they're owned by a British conglomerate, but they're an American company. They were, very well known to be, based in Vermont. So you have Israel, a foreign country, they're being punished for boycotting just the settlements, not just Israel itself. So it's really, I thought that was an important story to cover when I did, because it just goes to show how dangerous these laws are. And when Ben & Jerry's made that announcement, Israeli officials were pressuring American states and calling governors and telling them to enforce these laws. So, it's just really something how this stuff gets passed on the state level. All right, so the next one here, Biden's Gaza seaport will take months to build. So this one is from Kyle. This is one he wrote up over the weekend. So there's some more details about this plan that Biden has to build a port in Gaza. And U.S. officials say that it's going to take 45 to 60 days, which how many people are going to starve to death in that time? And this is, again, to build a temporary port to get more aid into Gaza. And the U.S. military is going to do this. Biden announced this during his State of the Union. And the operation is going to involve 1,000 troops. U.S. officials are saying that they won't put their feet on the ground in Gaza, but still, they're going to be right off the coast. And, this just seems like such a tripwire for the U.S. escalating its involvement. If American troops get killed right off the coast of Gaza, it's definitely going to mean a huge escalation. And if you're in Gaza, you don't even have to be in Hamas. Like, you think about, there's other groups, Palestinian Islamic Jihad or whatever, that if they know American troops are there, they might try to hit them. And, it's just seems so reckless. And again, this is just an extreme measure Biden is taking. Instead of cutting off Israel and ending this thing, he's trying to build this port. And they're dressing it up as, for a humanitarian reason. But it seems like it's just a way to get more involved. It's a military operation. So it's just, who knows? It just seems like it's just a debacle waiting to happen here. All right, so the next one here, a UN expert says that Israel is engineering famine in Gaza. So this article is from Mondo Weiss, and it says, back in mid-December, 2.5 months into Israel's war on Gaza, a UN-affiliated committee of famine experts reported that over 500,000 Gazans faced catastrophic hunger. All 2.3 million were in crisis, and the situation was deteriorating rapidly. So they spoke with one of these experts, Michael Fahiri, a special UN rapporteur on the right to food, who told Mondo Weiss, quote, "It's just sort of unfolding at a speed we've never seen before. We've never seen children pushed into malnutrition so quickly. This was all preventable. I have no doubt, and this is again in consultation with experts all over the world, we all have no doubt that the horror, the numbers, the degree of hunger, the degree of death from malnutrition will be higher than we are able to measure right now," end quote. And I've seen other famine and hunger experts say this, that they've never seen this happen so quickly, how quickly these people were pushed into malnutrition. And right now, I saw the latest number of people who have starved to death that's just being recorded in the hospitals is 27 just in the past few weeks. And this guy and again, I've seen other experts say this, that the real toll must be much higher. And one of the things to determine that a famine is happening is to know the rate that people are dying at with respect to the population. So if 2 out of 10,000 inhabitants of a population are dying every day, that means malnutrition. So they don't know if it's at that rate yet. That would be a lot every day. But they believe that this could be happening, or it could be right around the corner. So it's just really, really horrific. All right, so the next one here, Poland's foreign minister confirms that NATO troops are in Ukraine. So Polish Foreign Minister Radek Sikorski confirmed in comments on Friday that NATO troops are inside Ukraine, but he would not name the countries who have personnel on the ground. Sikorski said, quote, "NATO soldiers are present in Ukraine, and I would like to thank the ambassadors of those countries who have taken that risk. These countries know who they are, but I can't disclose them. Contrary to other politicians, I will not list those countries, end quote. So the fact that NATO troops are in Ukraine is an open secret. We know this, especially if you listen to this show, because I've been talking about it a lot lately, that the Discord leaks revealed last year that as of March 2023, there were 97 NATO Special Operations soldiers in the country. So a very small presence, but NATO troops on the ground nonetheless. And of course, this risks escalation and a direct war with Russia. And this issue has gotten much more attention since Macron, the French president, said recently that NATO has not ruled out the idea of sending troops. So in response to Sikorsky's comments, Russia said, that there's no point in NATO continuing to claim that they don't have troops inside Ukraine because of these comments and other comments recently about that fact. There's also that leaked recording of German military officers that revealed British soldiers inside Ukraine are helping Ukrainian forces fire Storm Shadow missiles, which have a range of about 150 miles. So if this name, Sikorsky, I believe I'm saying that right, Sikorsky sounds familiar, that's because he was the Polish official. At the time, he was a member of the European Parliament. Now he's the foreign minister. And I believe he was the foreign minister and defense minister in previous governments. The day that the Nord Stream pipelines blew up, he was the one that tweeted a picture of it and said, "Thank you, USA." So he's the one that first pointed the finger at the U.S. And he deleted that tweet after a few days. And another interesting fact about this guy is that he's married to Anne Applebaum, who's an American writer, neocon, total neocon. I think she's at The Atlantic now. But he's definitely an interesting character. All right, so the next one here, the Pentagon wants $10 billion to replace weapons that it sent to Ukraine. So a Pentagon official told Politico that they need $10 billion to replace weapons in U.S. military stockpiles that have already been sent to Ukraine. So this is really the Pentagon's pitch to try to get this Ukraine aid passed finally. The $60 billion that President Biden has requested includes funding to replenish U.S. stockpiles, but right now it's still sitting in limbo. That bill, the $60 billion, is part of the $95 billion foreign military aid bill that already passed through the Senate, but it's not clear if it's going to be brought to a vote in the House. So this official is saying that if the Pentagon doesn't get the money, it's going to hurt the U.S. military. And I think this goes to show, again, this could be part of just the Pentagon trying to get their money, saying things like this. But I think there's definitely some truth to it, considering the quantity of weapons and arms that the U.S. has sent to Ukraine. This official said, quote, "It would come back on our own readiness, on our own stockpile, to a certain extent if we can't get new funding," end quote. So U.S. officials have said that the Pentagon has been unable to give Ukraine any more military equipment this year. The last weapons package that was announced for Ukraine was at the end of December 27th. So it's March now, and there's been no new weapons packages, at least publicly disclosed. Who knows what could be happening behind the scenes? You never really know. But they haven't announced any since then. And it doesn't seem to me like, even if there is secret shipments going on, that it would be anything that significant. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. to construct a new port in the Philippines near Taiwan. The U.S. is funding the construction. The U.S. military is funding the construction of a new port in Batanes, which is the Philippines' northernmost province and is less than 125 miles from Taiwan. And this is something I know a few months back I saw reports that the U.S. was in talks about constructing this port. And now the governor of this province says that it's going to happen. The U.S. Army is going there next month, and they're going to discuss the project. And this is being billed as a civilian port, but it's the U.S. military involved in the construction, and the Philippine military is involved in the planning. So obviously, it's about preparing for a future war. And actually, the governor of this province said that one purpose of this port will be to evacuate Filipino workers who are in Taiwan. There's a lot of Filipinos work in Taiwan, And they're saying in the event of war, this new port would help evacuate them more quickly. So this is just another example of the U.S. preparing for a future war with China over Taiwan. And the U.S. military, last year, they signed a new deal to get access to 4 new bases in the Philippines. They've been more involved in the South China Sea, and tensions between the Philippines and China are really rising there. So this is all just tensions are just still really rising in this part of the world, even though so much focus is on Gaza and Ukraine. Something I want to try to focus on more is the China, Taiwan, South China Sea situation, because you never know when things could boil over. You know, I cover these Chinese-Philippine encounters in the South China Sea, and sometimes they end in collision. And who knows if sometime they might start shooting at each other. And if that happens, the U.S. has said they'll get involved. So this is something I think we do need to be focused on. All right, so the next one here, the Pentagon knew that the U.S. war in Somalia would fail. So this article is from Nick Turse at The Intercept. And he got his hands on a 2007 Defense Department study that found glaring problems with America's Horn of Africa campaign, but the U.S. military plunged ahead anyway. So the Pentagon has known of fundamental flaws with U.S. military operations in the Horn of Africa for nearly 20 years, but has nonetheless forged ahead, failing to address glaring problems according to a 2007 study obtained exclusively by The Intercept. The Pentagon study says, quote, "There is no useful shared conception of this conflict. The instruments of national power are not balanced, which results in excessive reliance on the military instrument. There is imbalance within the military instrument as well," end quote. So it was a 50-page analysis conducted by the Institute for Defense Analysis, a private think tank that works solely for the U.S. government. So again, this is a pattern that you see, and what Turse mentions is that it's similar to the Vietnam War. You had the Pentagon Papers that revealed the U.S. knew it was an unwinnable war, but they continued anyway. There was the Afghanistan Papers that came out in 2018 or maybe 2019. I forget exactly then, but revealed something else, another like government studies that they knew all along that Afghanistan was a losing battle. The Discord leaks kind of on a smaller scale because it wasn't big reports focused on Ukraine, but there were little things, the U.S. not thinking Ukraine could win the counteroffensive, and with Somalia, a similar thing here. And this is just, I think, a pretty important piece here from Nick Turse, so you could go check that out to get all the details on it. And Somalia, the U.S. is still bombing Somalia today. He said their first strike was in 2007. All right, so the next one here, Biden works against a ban on the purchase of Americans' data. So this is an article from Kyle at the Libertarian Institute, and it says, for years, several federal agencies have been spending U.S. tax dollars to buy Americans' data from private bulk sellers. As some members of Congress seek a new law against the practice, the Joe Biden administration is pushing back on the effort to curtail the power to buy the information that would otherwise require a warrant. So this is U.S. intelligence, military, and law enforcement agencies. They have gathered massive amounts of Americans' data through these private brokers, basically data that they collect from you while you're on the phone, on the computer, doing whatever. They sell to the government, and they don't need any sort of warrant or anything. So it's very intrusive. It's a very intrusive thing. So a bipartisan group of lawmakers has teamed up to stop the unconstitutional method of collecting massive amounts of Americans' information. And they introduced this bill that would prohibit the government from buying this stuff, although it would allow for the collection of data on foreign nationals, which that also would probably leave open some sort of loophole, to also collect stuff on Americans. But anyway, at least it's something here. And the White House is working against this and saying that they oppose this. So that's not really a surprise, but something so blatant for the White House to come out against it or in support of this sort of data harvesting. That's it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Ramsey Baroud, United Against Israel, Time to End World's Longest Occupation. One from Daniel Larison, On Air, Biden Walks Back His Own Rafah Red Line in Real Time. One from Katrina Vanden Heuvel and James Carden, 10 Years Later, The History of the U.S.-Backed Coup in Ukraine. One from Gideon Levy, When Israel Becomes Like Hamas. And the spotlight is from John Weeks, Imperial Assisted Suicide. So please go check all of that out. Again, it was a cool weekend going to D.C. for this event. And, I just want to thank everybody who was involved in that award for having me there. It was a really cool experience. We don't expect to get recognized like that, for this work that we do at antiwar.com. It feels like a thankless job a lot of the time. So, it was nice. I felt like I didn't deserve to be up there with Max and Gareth, but still, it was very cool for me. And just knowing how many of them read antiwar.com. And, I think the Gray Zone guys, Max and Aaron, won the top prize last year. Have just been invaluable. Most recently debunking the narrative around October 7th. And just in general, the way that they approach things is very courageous, I think. They're not afraid of, to be attacked. That was really cool. But you could support this show by sharing it. Tell your friends about antiwar.com. Like, subscribe on YouTube, Odyssey, and Rumble. I will be back tomorrow with some more news for you. Thanks for listening.